All right, so today, subject I'm not too familiar with, mental disorder. I have some personal information on it. But, it's kind of funny when you do a sociology class and they talk about mental disorders. So I like to see their angle on it, especially deviant behavior tends to be sort of a criminal justice topic. Has kind of that bend to it. So anyway, so we're going to look at the misconceptions, common myths, misconceptions. Be able to tell the difference between types of disorders. Really, it's more about the way they're categorized. Describe influence of social factors on mental disorders. Describe global mental demographics, evaluate social responses to mental disorders, and compare sociological models of mental illness. If we get all that done, it'd be a miracle. We'll at least try to cover some of it. It's estimated that about 50% of American adults suffer from mental disorder. Actually, we'll just switch over to that one so you can see this. I'll go back. 50% because during their lifetime. So used to be didn't even get it reported because there's so much stigma. So most people wouldn't go to a doctor for mild depression or even major depression, sometimes for even worse things that really interfere with their lives. Nowadays, because of our culture, it's become more and more acceptable, at least seek help. You know, maybe we'd still don't want to go around broadcasting it, and I don't recommend people do that even in my classes. You can talk about, like I do, I self-disclose, but also I'm a professional, so don't do this at home, right? So don't, just be careful about it. That's why we have guidelines and we talk about them, because it really is, some people don't do well with the information. You know, they don't know what to do with it. It bothers them, and it might change your relationships with people that maybe you don't want changed. Maybe sometimes it helps get rid of some people we don't want around. Today, in our society today, depression is the common cold. If you go into master's level therapy type degrees and licensing, the joke is that you might get bored because you'll probably sit around, and about half the time you'll be talking to depressed female wives, because typically, even though men probably have it too, women are more likely to seek help, and depression is so common. And because of our social structure, they'll talk about this, we'll talk more about that, but because of our moving from a society where everybody had a job and everything was considered, like if you grew up on a farm, all the kids chipped in on the farm. They might not like it, but they at least learned many skills, and they were seen as valuable partners. And some people would say they were treated as slaves, which that was probably true. Some people were, but children were considered very valuable asset. You know, and nowadays many children grow up playing video games, and they have so much spare time that there's very little value placed on you. You're more of a problem. We talk about the cost of raising a child. I think that's obscene. You know, I think we can look at, you need to know it costs something to raise children, but it should be something we want to do. You know, that it's a responsibility. I was looking at, we were watching Peter Kostenbaum this morning, and I looked up some of I was looking for his handouts, but I looked up some of his famous quotes, and one of them is, you're 100% responsible for how your child turns out. And you're 100% responsible for teaching them that they're 100% responsible for how they turn out. That's how it comes out. Is that we're 100% responsible for everything we do. including you and me, even my kids. So I just really, that's how I raise them, that's how I should raise them. Nowadays, we sort of give people things that they don't need to be given, or don't ask people to earn them.
Well, I mean, like when you have parents talking about how much it costs to raise a child, it's getting kind of sad. I mean, honestly, when I hear like a parent like threaten their child, like, you know, I gave you, like, when they're like, hey, I need this, like, well, I mean, you lived a good life because they put a roof over your head and
Right.
a bed for you to sleep on, but I mean, the part of me is just, it just kind of frustrates me, because like, that's not, I mean, that's your job, like, you don't get a right to complain about how much they cost, because they didn't ask to be born, you you decided to do what it took to have a child, and now it's your responsibility to pay for that child's well-being, and so when they complain about it, it just kind of irks me a little bit, because they don't have a right to complain about something that a child can't control.
Right, and I had a similar, I think it's probably generational, because I've had a similar conversation with my own children, and where they were really angry at us because, well, why'd you have all those kids? Because see, we had a two-tiered or even a three-tiered family where when we married, we had 3 kids between the 2 of us. 2 of them we were bringing into the marriage. 1 of them was in another family, and then we had 4 together. Well, the older ones were resentful because of the younger ones. The younger ones took too much of our time, and they didn't realize. Also, from the other side, I didn't know I thought I was doing the right thing by having 4 children. I still do, because what am I going to think? I can't take them back. I mean,
Right.
Here, return. I need to return.
Once you do it, you just have to accept it. Right?
Yeah, and they have to accept it too.
Well, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, you definitely
But I
don't
still-
need to be entitled children.
Oh, I know, and I still see their side of it. So everybody feels that angst, that feeling that it shouldn't be done like this, right? You know, kids are very critical of how parents do things
Oh, it's
as
so
well.
annoying.
It's
I'm not a parent, don't think that. It irks me when I hear
No,
children
I understand.
critique a parent about how they're parenting.
Yeah,
I'm-
so
I'm-
it works both ways, and I really understand. That's what I was thinking about with this subject. Deviance is really a philosophical class. It's how we define it, whether it's deviant or not. I mean, also we can say some things are, like from the other theory, some things are definitely deviant. You can also study it as an isolated case, but deviance also has that part where things change over time, and mentally ill people tend to be judged and stigmatized. They're thought to be extremely weird, and that mental illness is hopeless. Once you have it, you're over. You're done with
They
it.
are kind of weird to an extent.
Well-
when you're not used to like dealing with people who do have mental illness. I mean, from a normal
Yeah.
person's standpoint, they do come across as weird until you realize.
Deviant.
Right, until you realize, oh, okay, so they actually have a reason behind that important. Not that
Right.
you need reason, but you get what I'm saying.
Right. The idea is that many people who are depressed, we don't think of them as acting psychotic. That's the other thing, is like weird could be how you define it,
Yeah,
right?
it's
And-
subjective, I think.
And that there's a sharp, clear distinction between mentally ill and mentally healthy. Now the DSM has changed from that sort of, we're going to study it as an event or a separate category, to we're all on a continuum, and we all have slight personality issues, and but some people have them out here on this end that cause them a lot of problems, while some people back here, they just kind of learned it. We just think they're kind of quirky Uncle Joe, or we all know that we have these habits of the way we engage with life, and so and it's like me, I admit that I have dysthymia, and that's dysthymia, is dysthymiA, I think, but it's a low-grade depression.
That's
So
what you have?
yeah, so it's like it's not really treatable by any kind of medicine. It's not treatable like major depression's out here. Dysthymia is down on this end.
Is there a happy medium?
Probably.
in between them? Okay, I was just wondering, because I mean, I didn't
I think
realize.
that people all are on that continuum, right?
Yeah.
You have to decide what's a happy medium. That's deviant.
Well-
Deviant's when you go either way. Like you know that person that's so happy you can't. Oh, they're just always happy.
Sometimes
That drive me crazy. I mean, sorry.
Well, they can do that for sure. When they're forcing their happiness upon you, it's like, okay, I'm glad you're
Yeah.
happy, but don't force it on me. Like, let me be not happy for right now.
Right.
But I just wanted to make sure that there was a medium, not just like an extremist, like you're so depressed that you actually are considering taking your
Yes.
own life, and then hey, you're just barely kind of there. Because
Well-
I have depression, but I'm not like I do take medication for it, but I'm also not trying to kill myself either. So
I would say that you have a happy medium, but at the same time, if you're not a little bit depressed by what you see like on the media, something's wrong with you.
I'll start disheartened. Yeah.
You may be super sane, as the one guy said. You have to have a certain, like I tell people when I work with them, I'm not going to take away your denial, I just want you to look beyond it. Because you need denial to survive in the world. You need to be able to, okay, that's them, I've got things to do today. You know, like bad things happen that I have no control over. Well, I could let that really get me down, or I can just get on with my life and think about those things.
It's controlling the controllables.
Yeah, but sometimes those are hard to control if it affects you a lot. Like if you lose a loved one, for instance. So we don't call people mentally ill who have a grief over the loss of a loved one. But if it's 10 years out and I'm still down in the dumps about it, and I can't seem to get that's
Oh,
an
that's
issue.
you're still talking
Causes
about
me
the
problems.
depression, how we normally will naturally feel depressed in certain areas.
Right.
But and there are different ways you could different.
So
ways
yeah,
you
like
could handle it. I don't know.
so there's not necessarily a sharp, clear distinction.
Okay.
Because you have to take everybody's their set of circumstances into account, right? I can't, if somebody comes in psychotic and they smell like alcohol, I need to get them dry before I can decide whether they're really psychotic or are they this is caused by the chemicals that they've induced in their system, or did they take LSD, right? Something like that. You're going to act very psychotic. If you're going to, well, it is psychotic. You get psychosis on LSD. It's just temporary, theoretically. And then people get more depressed in the winter. That's only true with a very small subset that actually have a depression linked to the length of days. And
Yeah.
so it's not necessarily everyone. So we have this classification system, the DSM-5. Mental illness divided into two broad types, organic and functional. So organic, functional disorder is further divided into three major categories: psychosis, neurosis, and personality disorder. Psychosis involves the loss of touch with reality. So they made...
Is that, can you just look at somebody and decide that?
No.
Okay.
Generally, you'd have to have a lot of experience, interview them, and you look at your DSM and you say how many symptoms
What
they
is
have.
DSM exactly?
The DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual.
Oh, okay.
It's the psychiatric hospitals categorization.
Mhm.
It's a book with about 300. Used to be, well, watch, I think it's Sats. He said when he first started, he's a fairly old man in the video. He says he's a psychiatrist. So when he started, there was like 30. Now there's 300.
Now there's being
Because it's all, it's done by committee and people submit their belief systems about it, and then they add it or subtract it. Subtract things,
But
change them.
Like when you get through all of this, will the knowledge that you have help you narrow down certain things in that book so you don't have to thumb through all 300 of them?
Yes.
Okay, because I was like, that seems kind of counterproductive if you're trying
Well,
to diagnose somebody.
If you look at that, these categorizations, okay, some of these are more obvious. So if somebody's having a break with reality, like with schizophrenia or psychosis, they're going to be acting weird. They're going to be acting, you're going to say something's different, something's not right. Whereas somebody's depression, they're going to act like they got depressed, right? They're not going to necessarily have psychosis. You can have both, but that becomes
One cause the
complicated.
other?
Well, there's a depression that involves psychosis along with it.
Oh.
Or manic depression can have, or bipolar disorder can have psychotic symptoms.
That's what
But
bipolar is manic depressive disorder?
yeah, that's the same thing,
Oh.
bipolar manic. So schizophrenia, psychosis will tend to, you'll have those symptoms pretty much all the time.
Uh-huh.
And with bipolar disorder, it'll come during say a psychotic, a depressive or manic state.
It's almost like a tick that you have that causes you to like flip from one mood to the next. Is it? I mean, I don't know.
I don't know.
Because I've never had to deal with a bipolar person.
That's kind of, yeah, so you.
Because like with, what are they called? The people who have those ticks?
Oh, you're talking about,
I can't
I
remember.
can't think of the name of it, but yeah, I know what you mean.
But yeah,
Where they say words that they
Yeah,
don't
it's just
intend to
flipping.
say.
Yeah.
It's just like,
I cannot think of it.
it's all of a sudden, that.
I mean, I'll think of it later.
I'll
I'll
get that
pop it
later.
in when I think of it.
Okay.
So manic depressive is bipolar.
Oh, it's
just
Tourette's.
another word. Tourette's, there you go. So hallucinations, it says in the book that it doesn't make this point that most people don't see things that aren't there, most people just hear things. There are some that see things, and there's a rare, even more rare one where they'll feel things on their skin, so it's tactile. But that's pretty rare. There are people that are like that.
Have you dealt with one that way?
Tactile, I don't know, because a lot of times they won't report all their symptoms, especially if I was working in the mental, where I've worked at a psychiatric hospital. It's not, I haven't worked with enough people, and then I worked in a mental health prison where I'm sure some of them may have done it. But most of the time they'll have heard voices, but they won't talk about it, pretty much.
So you have
Especially
to
when
just-
they're on medication, they don't have those symptoms.
But so they don't talk about the voices they're hearing, you just have to figure that out on your own?
They will if they're like, okay, let's say I get called into to the emergency room to evaluate somebody who's acting like they might hurt themselves or they're worried about them. They might tell me that they're hearing voices, or they might act like they're hearing voices. So it's like they're listening to something, or but most of the time, like some of the person I saw, they had dealt with the mental health people before, and they knew it was because they weren't on their medication. And he told me, I felt so bad for him, because he said, you have to understand that these voices sound just as real as you talking to me right now. And I just felt bad for him, that you have to live with that. And he said, it makes me feel horrible. And what they do is typically they'll end up abusing other substances to try to mellow out the side effects of the
So
medications.
are those voices the only things that they're just hearing? Is that like their own thoughts that they're hearing, or?
That's a good subject. It's a subject of debate. Most people think it's their thoughts, but it's also voices sometimes from the past. So it'll be like a dad's voice or a mom's voice or
Like
somebody
saying
they
the things
know.
that they're thinking, I guess?
Yeah,
Okay, so they're.
only it sounds like it. Or there's some that will hear things from a TV set, think that they're getting secret messages from TVs or radios. It's really horrible.
That's bizarre.
Because you can't, that's very hard to sort out what you're hearing. The guy he's a very famous mathematician.
How would I say?
He got a Nobel Peace Prize, or a Nobel Prize for math, and he was a schizophrenic. And there's a movie made about him that it'll show you, it kind of gives his internal thought process like you're asking.
Was it like a high functioning schizophrenia or something?
Oh, he's extremely brilliant. It didn't affect his abilities. In fact, he was a savant, basically, or somebody that was so far above you and me that in math that it wouldn't be any competition. Neurosis is another classification, and that's less severe. There's very little distortion with reality and ability to behave, and they have the ability to behave in a normal way, but they might just be bothered by something all the time. They can't quite get past it, and it bothers them all the time. They're going to talk. That's what you typically find in an outpatient mental health center. Somebody with anxiety or depression that they can live with it, but they don't want it. Who would want to? So their neurotic symptoms prevent them from being as happy as they want to be. And that's the joke, if you go into mental health, that you'll spend most of your time talking to these kind of people, because the others are either on medication and don't need therapy. They probably do, but they won't come in for it. They just go to the psychiatrist, and they have a caseworker. You guys that get out of here with a bachelor's degree and go work at the mental health center, you'll work with people that are taking medication for
We can just avoid
schizophrenia and
not
bipolar.
working there, correct?
Huh?
We can work elsewhere other than the
Yeah.
mental health center?
Yeah.
Because that would drive me crazy, literally.
Well, don't jump off the boat yet. We'll see what happens.
No, I'm just more working with like the criminals. It's a bit more safer.
What do you think?
Yeah. I'm not worried
For
about
the criminals?
Like working in a police station, for me mentally and emotionally, I feel like that'd be a lot safer for me than working in a psych ward, because I don't want to go out throughout my day feeling terrible for every single person, because they can't help what's going on. You know, I mean, some criminals can't help what's going on if it's like a mental disorder that they have. But if like you go and rob a store, it's not something that you're like, oh, I can't help it. Well, you can, but that's okay.
Yeah. Well, there are people that actually, I believe we can help people with mental illness too. It's just a matter of knowing what to do and what they need. They need to help get their own goals. They need to be able to give them back the choice to make those decisions that you're talking about.
And it also has to do with familiarity. I'm more familiar with like criminal, that sounds terrible, but I've been around a lot of those people a lot more than I have like mental health patients. So they kind of freak me out a little bit because I don't want to like hurt them because I don't know what I'm doing, but that's okay.
So another classification is anxiety, and then obsessive compulsive, depression, and psychophysiological disorders. Physiologic disorder includes hysteria, psychosomatic illness, and conversion reaction. So people that they actually don't have a medical condition, but they feel like they have a medical
You're
condition.
saying that's the psychosomatic stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
also-
and for them it's real. So it's not, we can't say it's not real.
Right.
It's just that the medical doctors can't explain it.
Can that keep them from healing, like if they were to cut themselves? Because that keep that wound from really healing clean?
Probably not.
Okay. I didn't know how far
No.
along that.
Well, there's probably examples of that. I'm
Because
trying
if
to
your
think if
brain
I've ever heard
legitimately
of
thinks
that.
it's not, like, if your brain thinks it's actually in pain,
That's
like,
right.
bleeding out, then it may never.
It may not.
I don't
You're right. Who knows? Our body. We know that we used to clearly divide the mind and the body. And now, the more we learn about it, the more we believe we know about it. And sometimes I wonder, the more we believe we know about it, the less likely you are to separate the mind and the body. Because the mind, if you're going to take a biological stand, the mind is a part of the body.
Yeah.
The brain is part of the body. Now, some people don't believe in a mind. They just believe in a brain and a body. And we're like a computer, and we're conditional. So we are conditioned to act the way we are. But I think we're more than that. I think we're made in the image of God. I think we have a separate part of us that does go to heaven that's not in our brain. It's not created by our chemistry.
Right.
It's put in each human being, right? Before you're born, probably. It says in the Bible that God knew me before I was even born. So I always wonder, where were we before we were born?
Right.
What were you doing? I always think about that. Wow, wonder where we were. That's freaky.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of fun to think about because I believe in God, so I'm not worried about where we were. I just wonder, wow, I wonder if we had anything to do, or if it was just an idea in the mind of God and He planted it. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
Strange, like a seed.
Yeah. Which I don't think we're meant to know everything about it.
No, we'll never know. I don't think, really. I think at some point we won't care anymore because we'll be in complete joy.
Oh, yeah, for real. You'll be in a different body is what it was explaining, is like you get a new body. It's like, does that mean like people who have no limbs will have all 4 limbs back? Like,
well, or did my son who dies a baby will he have a body, a full body?
yeah, full adult. And
You're
like,
gonna
I believe
the
he
way
will.
you
He'll carry me into heaven,
Yeah.
like I would have carried
and
him.
the other thing is like, will you know your family? Like, will you still have a family up there?
Yeah.
Obviously, you'll be.
Or will
one
it
big
matter?
family, but- Right. Like, will you still be like, hey, where's my mom, my dad, and my brother and sister? Or is it going to be just like, what's up, folks? How's it?
We're all family.
Well, I was trying to remember, there's one of the scriptures, either Paul or one of the others, made it sound like we wouldn't be, Jesus said that, we said we wouldn't be married anymore.
Right.
Because the Pharisees came and asked him, if you divorce and remarry and you divorce and they die and you remarry, you're like, who would you be married to when you go to heaven? He said, there's no marriage in heaven.
No.
So that kind of,
effort into it then?
that's probably,
Do what?
Why are we putting so much effort into it then?
Yeah, why are we?
well,
I think it's
because it
just
changes
human.
you. I think that's because we need it to change ourselves. Being married means you don't get the right to be selfish anymore.
Yeah, well, it's just kind of like how God put
Selfishly
Adam and Eve
self-centered.
both on the earth to start out. You know, because the men were not competent enough to live without the women, obviously.
Yeah.
That's how that goes.
Well, we actually need each other, you're right.
Yeah.
And we can't have babies without,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
you know how that's done, right? Okay,
I heard
blatant
it was
disregard
good
for
to be
society's
sorry.
rules. Here I am, blatant disregard for Oakwood's rules. No, not really. Thought to be linked, and you know, sexual activity in the right context is holy. So I don't think there's anything wrong with about it.
Right.
To quit looking at me like that, Joy. Okay. Thought to be linked is lack of moral development. So the people in prison, in the jail system, criminal justice system, like I think you kind of implied, it's considered they should know better because or a lack of moral development. If somebody grew up in a crime family, they might believe that it's okay, you know.
Yeah.
Or if you grew up in Italy back in, say, 300 years ago, and your family owned, your father owned a vineyard, and you had a big, you basically didn't have any police force because you made your own. That's where we got the mafia, essentially, because at least that's what I understand is that those folks, they made their own law. And that's why the true mafia families, they're not supposed to mess with people outside. Like, the only people that they kill or take action against are people who are involved with them,
Yeah.
who are not acting right. But they're not supposed to take care of, they're not supposed to bother civilians. So it's kind of a weird thing. It's
Well,
like
that's-
having their own country.
Well, that's what's gonna happen, well, not necessarily to that extent maybe, but that's something similar if they're gonna defund all the police and kick them all out of the stations. It's just gonna be a bunch of mafias forming in little cults, I'll call it, that wanna
Yeah.
go and make their own laws and,
Well, we'll just be isolated, won't we? Unless we band together.
well, yeah, hopefully we would do something like
I
that.
hope we don't have to get that far, but it's
Martial
pretty
law,
scary.
all that,
Yeah.
mumbo jumbo.
So this is going to go through this is the DSM-5 classification system. If you're in abnormal psych, you're basically going through each of these as we go through each chapter. That's all the neurodevelopmental. That's where you have autism or Tourette's, or at least Tourette's gets started in a child.
Is every autistic person super smart? Because any autistic person I've
No.
ever met is like super like intelligent. Like I've actually had them like tutor me in math because of how smart these people are.
Yeah, there are people that are extremely smart, but there's also people that are mentally, they're what we used to call retarded.
Oh,
Because there's all different kinds of people. But there seems to be some tendency toward there are very high functioning, we didn't used to call them autism, we called it Asperger's.
oh yeah.
And they're very high functioning, like you'll find doctors like that. I found the guy that did my spinal surgery, he was a lot like that. He didn't do much social, but he was brilliant at doing what he did. You know, I wouldn't ask for anybody else to do it, because you could tell the guy just knew his stuff.
Yeah, well, I
But
mean,
you wouldn't go out and have a
a beer, I guess. you could say.
or go to you wouldn't visit with him at a party. In fact, he doesn't go to many parties, I don't know.
Well, you know Carly Schuwander, her brother, he's autistic, and he was actually helping me in math class one day because we were in the same one, and so,
Yeah.
and then my uncle has a few autistic kids too, but they're all super intelligent, so I was just curious.
So schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, related disorders. There's several different versions of bipolar, 3 separate classifications. It depends which is, like one of them has a higher depressive rate, one of them has a higher manic rate, and one of them goes back and forth.
What's the
It's not as very high. Yeah.
What's manic again?
Manic is the extreme excitement and euphoria, and they just get high on their own. They'll go out and they'll spend all their money in the credit account, or one of our friends gave us a horse. I mean, she just gave us a pony. Well, great, what's
what
to do with a pony?
Big
Well,
old stallion in the backyard.
We had to stable it, go find some place to keep it,
So
but-
that's what bipolar is that
But
transition
she-
between that and depression?
and then they get extremely depressed, so they swing.
Things go up and down.
So, but do you have some that actually get angry instead?
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
is that like a form of depression, is the anger, or is that actually completely different? Like, is that a
probably
third?
depression.
Could you have multiple instead of 2? Could you have 3? Could you have 4? I'm just curious to see how big, like, the bipolar person, I guess bi would insinuate too.
Well, some of them will
Multipolar?
cycle within 6 months, some cycle, like that's the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. They cycle at a faster or lesser
Oh,
rate.
so it's like a cycle thing? It's not just like they're walking down the street and they just flip into a cycle?
No, they go into cycles. And some people cycle faster than others, so they believe that some people cycle in the same day. And then some people will go through depression for 6 months and then they'll go into a manic state.
And is it similar to split personality disorder or no?
No, that's a different, that's pretty much a psychological disorder, probably caused by child abuse, where people create this other world they live in. And so they'll separate their personalities, and they can, they call it
Does it just get out of control?
not cabinet, but they have boxes. No, they don't get out of control necessarily.
Well, like, 'cause could they have controlled their split personality, or is it something you're born with, or is it something that is created?
No, it's created. Well, most people believe it's created. There's controversy about that,
Okay.
but most people believe it's created.
So is it something that they just hide, and then all of a sudden, the older they get, the less they can really hide that part of them, and it just kind of comes out?
Yeah, some people hide it. Yeah, it's hard to tell because sometimes when they go into the other personality, they're acting like the other person, so you don't know. Now, there are people that compartmentalize, and you and I both do it to a certain extent. When you daydream, or when you go, like when you're not here, you go down the road and you're dissociating because you don't remember where you go, right?
I've never done that.
Well, yeah, you probably have.
I promise you, I remember where I go all
You
the
kinda
time.
like
I don't
zone
mean
out.
that. I mean that you go down several miles down the road and you won't be paying attention because it's just you're on autopilot and you're thinking about something else.
I've done that, but not driving.
Like you know where
Yeah.
you're going and you're doing all the like turns and everything, but like mentally you're just like
And then
Right.
suddenly,
I've done
wow,
that in
how'd
the
I get?
passenger
I mean,
seat,
I'm
but
like here,
I've only been driving a couple
40
of
miles.
years.
Well, if you could do it in other ways too.
I do it
So
when I come up here sometimes. I'm like
it's just
Where
general
you come
dissociation.
from?
Texas,
We dream.
5 hours.
Why would you do? Oh,
It's just straight away.
Well, yeah, but just the people suck at driving in between here and there.
No,
So,
your mind, part of
If
your
you trust
mind
me.
is
I'm
there.
still visual there, but
You see everything, and if something comes up, you're gonna
react. Yeah.
You're gonna be there, but you're thinking about something, so you dissociate yourself from the road, and you're thinking, because you drive you crazy if you drove 8 hours just thinking about, I gotta.
well, I'm not constantly
Yeah.
thinking. I'm not like Hawkeye over here watching the road like a weirdo, but at the same time, I'm not just completely.
Well, you just think
disengaged.
about
You
it,
still,
notice it.
yeah, you
see
still
what
look
happens.
and everything. You're like, okay, you just don't realize that you're still driving and you can see like everything.
So you're telling me I've done this a bunch of times without
Yep.
realizing?
Yeah,
I'm doing
Yeah.
I think everybody does it.
That's unfortunate. I
Because
may
you-
die someday from that. 'Cause I
No,
don't
it
realize
actually is a helpful thing because you can do more than one thing at a time that way. And you can actually think about what you're thinking about and not what you're necessarily doing and still drive safely.
So you're saying like the split personality is like similar to daydreaming? Is that what you're saying?
But it's more severe.
Well, yeah, because I'm not
Because
exactly.
you're actually separating yourself, and sometimes one personality runs the show, and some of them, there's some of them that have 15, 20, 30 personalities.
So like literally like one personality will be just completely blank for one day, won't have a clue. I mean,
Right.
How does that? I don't know. I think I'll get stuck on this. I don't know how it works because it just makes me wonder. Have you ever other high functioning split personality? Like,
Oh, yeah.
can you medicate them?
Medication probably doesn't help you. What you have to do is have therapy, and you have to convince the personality that's controlling some of the others. This is theory. In theory, I mean, some people believe this, and I think it's probably accurate, that you have to get them to come together in some way.
Have a communion and a little council meeting.
Well, one of them will have control over the other, and so you'll have them allow themselves. You okay with it?
The chair snapped.
Okay, let's keep going.
Like I was
Because you're
zoned into
you're
what you
actually
said.
questioning some of these things that are on here. So that's a
Is it scary?
dissociative disorder. What you're asking about is a dissociative disorder. And there could also be dissociative amnesia, where you end up in another place and you really don't remember how you got there. And you can have that with drinking, called a blackout, but this is psychological. So Identity disorder is what they call multiple personality now.
I hear that people can like, without being drunk or something, they can get so angry where they're completely just.
Some people can.
My
yeah.
friend does that.
I've
Some
done it
people can do that
once,
without
but-
drinking. They call it whiteout instead of blackout. That's not why, but just to separate it out. So they get so angry they don't remember what they did. And then
Yeah, I've done that before.
commit a
where I-
crime.
Like years ago, this wasn't recent, don't worry, I'm not gonna kill you, but where I just completely forget what, or I don't remember anything that happened, something happened and kind of came to, and I was like, oh, hey.
So dissociative disorders, somatic symptoms, we talked about that. Feeding and eating disorders. Pica, that's eating odd things like glue or
Coins?
possibly, yes.
I've seen that on like 1,000 Ways to Die, like someone just eating shards of glass or tire shreds or coins was another thing. It was
And of course,
disgusting.
anorexia and binge eating, bulimia. Elimination disorders, enuresis or encopresis, where you pee or poop your pants.
Uncontrollably, like it just happens.
Some people do it under control. Probably with kids, it's more with children.
Like
But
there's
you
a
can also
spot
have
here.
it not because of a mental disorder. Sleep weight, you just physically have that problem when you get older. You know, you can't control it anymore. They
Right.
have those adult diaper thing.
Yeah,
But this is
depends.
more of a mental disorder that children will refuse to, and they'll hold their poop and get all blocked. I've had kids in my office that,
So
that's what
doctors
they
must
do.
hate giving them colonoscopies, I guess. I don't
well,
know.
they do stuff to get them opened up.
That's it.
And it's sexual dysfunctions. Obviously, you see this on TV all the time now. Didn't used to have that stuff on TV.
It was, my mom was talking about how commercials like this irritate her now, because when she watched TV, she never had medication commercials or other stupid things like that. It was
So
like-
then gender dysphoria is something that they're still, see, the psychiatric people still call it an illness.
What is gender dysphoria?
That's where you don't feel comfortable in your gender, your sexual. So what we're seeing in the media.
Like a
they're-
transgender person
Trans,
has that?
transgenders, yeah, and so it's, like I always say, I think it's a mental disorder.
So
I don't
something
think it's
born with?
anything normal, no?
Oh.
Well, you're born with your gender.
Well, yes, but I'm
I
saying.
mean, you're born with your sexual, your biological sex. But
Right.
different people visualize themselves as something else.
I didn't know if like you were just born one day and then once you got old enough to really see who you were